Welcome back to this week's episode of The Follow-Up, where we recap this week's sermon so you can grow deeper in your relationship with Jesus. I'm Carrie, and I'm here with Garet and Jack. Welcome,
Hello.
guys.
How's it going?
I'm going great.
Good.
Today we are going to be discussing Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 through 20. Kind of an interesting story we got here going on with Abram. So I would love to know from you guys, what was something that stood out from you, or as you were prepping, or things that really piqued your curiosity as you guys were going through studying and prepping for this week's sermon?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. As I was reading and studying it, Abraham doesn't have an escape plan for Sarah. There's right? As you're reading it, he's like, hey, this is what's gonna happen. I want you to tell them that you're my sister, and then they're probably gonna take you, and I'll get treated well for it. And there's no but then we're gonna meet up at midnight behind this building,
exactly,
and we're gonna just escape into Egypt.
Yeah,
and we find it was nah, that just kind of really wouldn't be Abraham. Just feel there was not much foresight. It just was kind of the whole point of desperate people, desperate times, and desperate things. It was just here's this kind of plan, and we'll just kind of see how it goes from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of threw it out. Ladies, if your husband ever says this, your response will probably, I will cut you. It's not going to be, okay, you got it. But, yeah, that's a trap moment. So.
Yeah. Anything for you, Jack?
Yeah, for me, I kind of jump forward to Hebrews. And Hebrews talks about, kind of gives us a reflection of, hey, this is how Abraham's remembered. And for me, the win there was, Abram does some dumb things. And I made the comment, this is only step one of dumb things. Abram's about to say, hold my beer, because I'm taking it to a whole new level of stupidity, and there's more to come. But when you read Hebrews, the author of Hebrews doesn't capture that.
Right.
Hebrews capture is, man, this is a man of faith who stepped out, and his sons, who, by the way, are their own knucklehead version, they step out in faith, and they're building a city whose maker is God. That's the blueprint. So I appreciate the honesty of the Old Testament and the integrity of telling the whole story, and I appreciate Hebrews going, you know what? Yeah, the road wasn't easy, but look where they went. You got to leave room for some stupidity in the mix.
Yeah, even in Galatians 3, it talks all about as Christians, we are connected, that our Abraham is our that we're children of Abraham if we are connected to him through Christ. And so there's tons of areas in the Bible where Abraham is less really remembered for all his mistakes that he does make, but remember as being this foundation, this first covenant that is going to lead to Christ.
And how cool is that for us? We're not trying to live up to a perfection expectation, but our role model, like you're saying, is a man of faith. And not perfect, but be patient. That's why I wore the shirt, honestly, because I was and it's from a different sermon series or a different message series, but it's man, and I'm sure we'll get to these questions down the road, but when we look at our leaders today, they're setting examples, but be patient. They're not perfect.
Yeah.
No one in the Bible was perfect. So anyway.
Yeah, when I got the title for it, Learning the Hard Way, I was really curious as to where this was all gonna go and kind of end up. And both of you had kind of shared some examples from your guys' life of things you kind of had to learn the hard way, or Jack, especially for you, things that you had to pass down to your kids that you didn't mean to.
Yep.
So I look at that as okay, I was always taught that pain and failure is the best teacher. Now, someone who loves Jesus and strives to look more like Jesus, sometimes we might be tempted to be well, if that's true, maybe I should make a wrong decision and learn from it the hard way. How do we as believers teeter this of yes, some things are best learned the hard way, or can be learned the hard way, with what does that look like to actually walk with Jesus through it, and just kind of wrestling through that aspect of it.
I go to Romans, and Paul saying, well, maybe I should sin more so I get more grace. And he said, God forbid. The goal isn't to be stupid. The goal is to learn from our stupidity and heartache and wounds and moments of weakness and things like that. That's where I go.
I know you said this a lot, if we can teach people through our scars, that's really important. Sure, maybe for us, we need to learn the hard way, and it's a good moment for us to learn. But there's so many times in my life that I'll go through something hard and I will learn a lesson. But then in a discipleship relationship, I can then tell someone like, hey, this is what I learned. I don't want you to go through what I went through. So here, learn from me. And if you didn't learn, well then, okay, you're gonna have to learn the hard way.
Have at
Right.
it. Yep.
Yeah, so how have you guys seen that play out in discipleship relationships where you're maybe sitting next to somebody shoulder to shoulder and you're like, hey, I kind of see you're going in this trajectory. Let me tell you what I went through.
Yeah. Do you want to go first or me?
you got it.
Okay. So at the age and stage I'm at now, I'll go to different pastors' conferences and they're great conversations, but there's so much I don't know in the tech world and I don't know and where things are going. And it's like, okay, cool. I'll sit back. I'm not kidding. I was at a conference one time and they start using initials for things going on in the tech world. And I'm texting Pastor Bill under the table like, hey, what does this mean? I don't even know what this means. I'm out. But then when they start getting back in with, hey, I've got this elder who's a real problem to work with, or this pastor on our staff whose wife is battling fill in the blank, or a staff member, let me help you with that. Because the real life stuff that is people to people, that's where for me, I feel like, all right, I've got a scar or two I can show. Like we're about to hire someone, but we see this in the process, then run the other way because I didn't and I got burnt. And we had to make some hard calls with one guy in particular within 90 days of a hiring. So if I can help someone that way, especially right now in the stage of my life and career, younger pastors, I'm all about it.
Yeah, for me, it's just I just recognize the spot I'm in, especially for student ministry, where my main context is, that I'm not too far removed from a lot of them. And so for a lot of them, like I just remember the life that they lived and the decisions and the choices that they were able to make. And I feel like then I can really just tap into like, hey, like I have walked the walk and I know exactly maybe the decisions that you want to make right now, given your circumstances, that you want to chase the girls, that you want to chase the popularity, you want to do these things. But like I have plenty of those scars that I'd love to show you and show you what happens when you make those poor choices, and they're going to lead to consequences that you do not want to have in your life.
One thing I think I'd tag on, because you're spot on, even just kind of thinking through what we've said, our culture doesn't necessarily value older mentors. It's like find a peer. And sometimes there's something about someone who's already been through it. Like learn from someone steps ahead of you. You know, when you're listening to a previous generation, and they don't have to be that much older, you know, but when you can speak to what they are about to go through, been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and see this scar, you know, see this mark on my arm. It's a great learning experience, and I don't know that I valued it as I should have when I was younger, but now that I'm not quite as young, I'm looking for guys ahead of me. How do I do this well? I'm looking for guys who did that and ladies who did that. Same with student ministry.
And we have this beautiful opportunity as followers of Christ. I know a limiting belief that I had for a really long time was, well, I'm just too young. So like, I don't have influence over anybody in my life, which is not true, because if you have friends, if you have coworkers, like you own this aspect of you're setting an example. And I know both of you guys really talked about that in this week's sermon of who are the people that are looking up to you, who are looking even directly towards you, of like, what kind of example are you setting? And before we hit record, Garrett and I were talking of like, I grew up in a house that was do as I say, not as I do. Or more is caught than taught. And being very mindful of our actions. I know you guys both talked about that. So what does that look like as someone who may not feel like they have influence, maybe not serving in student ministry, maybe don't have kids? Like, what does that look like for them to have influence in being a example for Jesus in the midst of their life?
Yeah, what I said is that like someone's always watching you, and like that's for good or for bad. That like you have some sphere of influence in your life. Like you said, it could be you are part of like your job. People are always going to be watching you and see your work ethic, how you're doing things. They're going to know if you're just kind of just coasting through life and you're kind of just taking things always the easy way and you're never taking on any more burden. Like the reality is that people are always going to watch you, and then people are going to then make the choice of like, oh, like if this person's doing it, like I'm just going to do I'm going to work how they're doing. I'm going to do how they're doing. I'm just going to get away with things they're going to be getting away with. Or they're going to see like, wow, like I don't know why, but like he is really like, he's working hard. Like she's doing an awesome job. Like I just feel like they just feel the aspiration of like, I just want to be like them. I see how hard they work and I want to be like them. So the reality is that, like, you do have somebody and you probably don't see it, but there's someone that is watching your actions, watching how you speak, and they will then either go this way or that way depending where you go as well.
Yeah. We do a lead class at Spring Lake. I love teaching that class. Probably one of my favorite things we do with each person who teaches it. Statistically, every person influences 10 people. Statistically, no matter who you are, what you do, you influence 10 people. And the definition of leadership is influence. So did Abram realize when he was had this going on with Sarah and he's about to put her in the spot, I'm going to set an example for generations to come? Probably not. But each of us needs to be aware, just what you were saying. Each of us needs to be aware. And we can't live in fear, but we live with wisdom, you know, that we are an influence as a parent, as a peer, as a friend, as a child, grown child or younger. Like, we're all speaking into somebody.
Yeah.
Set an example.
And like, that's a statistic of like 10 people is like, that's not small potatoes. I think like there's also like people maybe see like us on staff or we to teach, like where we have influence over hundreds of people that we just speak. And we're like, oh, like I'm just this little old person who I attend my church. Maybe I'm part of a small group, but it's like, no, like even if you have one life, if you have one person in your life that you can directly disciple and pour into and influence them, and you can push them closer to Jesus. Like, I just want people to understand, like, that's so worth it. That you can
absolutely.
make an influence. You can influence one person's life and point them towards who Jesus is and how to live for Him.
Yeah. A story that I have been taught over and over and over again. I used to work for a business coach, and she started her podcast, started a blog years and years and years ago, and she never got anybody to read it. She would just see like one person or like a couple people here, and then all of a sudden she goes, you know what, this is not even worth it anymore. I'm just going to be done. And she gets an email, like her to the point where like her family's not reading this, like they just don't care. And she gets an email saying, hey, is everything okay? Like, how come you stopped? And she goes, what? Like, she didn't know who this person was. And he goes, no, I actually have been waiting for your articles. I've been learning so much from your blogs.
Interesting.
And she came to the conclusion of an audience of one is still an audience.
Yeah.
And I think so often we are looking for, how can I, and maybe some people are in the spot of like, where I feel like I need to have bigger influence to feel like my words matter, or to feel like my actions matter, when really like the one person in your life that could be looking up to you, like that still matters and still has impact, because we maybe on this side of eternity may not know what that looks like, but yet an audience of one is still an audience and we still have influence over that person. And I just like that's a very humbling thought, that we as staff at a church, or maybe someone at a college or in high school, like an audience of one is still an audience. So be mindful, be careful of how you're representing Jesus, because that one person influence could really make a huge difference in your life.
And your clicks and likes aren't your whole range of views and influence. That's, I think, especially now, that's super important to remember.
Because, like, I mean, you said, like, an audience of one is still an audience. It's like we see throughout even the story of Abraham of, like, how much does one person, how much does one man throughout, and even from Abraham to his sons to David, like, there's so many, like, just one person can create such big waves. And so if we then, how we influence that one person, like, we don't know what that person's going to do. We don't know how much that person is going to then go influence other people and what maybe the impact they're going to have in other people's lives. And so the impact that we have on just one could make huge ripple effects.
Yeah, absolutely. To wrap things up, I want to talk to the person who maybe feels like they're in the spot that Abram was in this passage of...
Your wife is not your sister. Let's start there.
Let's start there, yes.
I hope not.
That you find yourself... Jack, something that you brought up about this passage specifically was we don't hear, and God said, or like we don't hear like God specifically telling Abram to do anything. It was more like, this is just what Abram decided to do, like decide to flee, make wrong decisions. If we're talking to the person who's sitting in that spot right now, what would you tell them?
Yeah, because I thought about that from a perspective, and that's what I try and be reflective of what would I do in that spot.
Yeah.
What if it was my wife whose life could be in jeopardy because there's no water left here, and all of my income based on animals and crop are like dying. Like, what would I do in that spot? Would I have done the same thing? Would I have just run to the first available place? But when you look at it, you're putting yourself and your family in a place where you have to morally compromise. You have to put them at risk, like you were saying. I mean, hey, going out with Pharaoh and good luck. You know, that's basically what it was. But I'll get to live off the fat of the land, and I'm going to get some blessing out of this. And it was a roll of the dice. He didn't know that was going to be the outcome. But still, I mean, you've got to compromise. So I don't know. I think there's some patience involved in saying, all right, Lord, what are you doing in this drought season?
Yeah.
I've run from stuff because I saw drought and didn't see a God, a provision. Sometimes it's just we're right on the brink of it when we quit. I told the story in one of the services this weekend. Short version, out of money, 3 kids, saw some things coming up for the kids. So I called my mom. My mom was like consummate mom. Cookies everywhere. Anytime I came over, my favorite meal was going to be made. She was that mom. And I'm like, hey, Mom, we need money for the kids. A dance class is coming up. A league is starting. And my mom, of course, okay, honey, I'll send it to you. And she called me back half an hour later and was like, I can't send you this money. She was like, you need to learn to trust the Lord for this stuff. And I remember thinking in my head, I did, and I didn't get it. That's why I'm calling you. Like, I just didn't want to wait any longer. And I think there's those moments where, those Abrahamic moments of, you got to wait, or you got to see what God's up to. Because as Jeff Letter and I are going to talk about next week, Hagar comes out of Egypt with them, and that's another nightmare. I mean, there's more to this story that comes out of this scene than just the battle that we just heard about. So, man, sometimes you got to be patient. Listen to voices of wisdom. See what God may be up to.
Ditto.
That sounds great. Well, you left us off on a good teaser for next week.
Good.
So make sure you join us next week for another episode of The Follow-Up as we dive into more learning about Abram. And we hope to see you guys next week. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss out on an episode.